The urgent buzz of Officer Diana Brooks's police radio shattered the steady hum of her cruiser's engine. She had just turned onto a quiet, dimly lit street in Greenville, North Carolina, when the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Possible. Child neglect. Infant in distress. 1428 Elmwood Avenue. No adult present. Respond immediately. Diana's knuckles whitened as she gripped the wheel. Elmwood Avenue wasn't known for happy stories, just rows of deteriorating buildings and long-forgotten promises. She flicked on the sirens, the red and blue lights painting the cracked pavement as she sped toward the address. The apartment complex loomed in the night, dark and desolate. Cardboard-covered shattered windows, graffiti scarred the weathered walls, and the silence was heavy, oppressive. Diana stepped out, her boots crunching on the loose gravel. Her breath formed soft clouds in the chilly air as she approached the slightly ajar door. "Greenville PD, anyone inside?" she called, her voice firm. No response. She pushed the door wider, her flashlight slicing through the dimness. The acrid smell of mildew clawed at her senses. Suddenly, a faint, heart-wrenching wail cut through the stillness. Weak, yet desperate. Her pulse quickened as she moved toward the sound, stepping past scattered debris and peeling wallpaper. The cries led her to a small, dim back room. Diana froze momentarily, absorbing the dismal scene. A crib, paint flaking from its wooden frame, sat shoved into the corner. Inside, wrapped in a torn blanket, was a baby, no older than a few months. His cries were hoarse, his frail body trembling, with hunger and fear. A nearly empty bottle of formula lay on the floor, crusted over from disuse. Diana's chest tightened. No child should endure this. Carefully she lifted the baby, cradling his fragile form against her chest. His cries softened, though his clenched fists trembled with desperation. Grabbing her radio, she spoke urgently. "Dispatch, this is Officer Brooks. I have an infant here in critical need, requesting EMS immediately, 1428 Elmwood Avenue." As she waited, Diana rocked the baby gently, her mind racing. How long had this child been left alone? What had driven someone to abandon him in this state? The faint sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance. Yet Diana couldn't shake the weight of the scene. Elmwood was no stranger to hardship, and it seemed that racism and neglect lingered in the cracks of its crumbling buildings. Her gaze hardened. This child deserved better. Greenville deserved better. As the ambulance pulled up, Diana whispered to the baby, "You're safe now." No, one's leaving you behind again. The night might have been dark, but Officer Diana Brooks vowed to be a light in the shadows for those who needed it most. A wave of anger and sorrow coursed through Officer Diana Brooks as she held the trembling baby close. His weak cries grew quieter, as though he'd used up every ounce of strength he had left. His fragile body pressed against her chest, a stark reminder of life's vulnerability. Diana had seen countless heartbreaking situations during her years on the force. But this one struck differently. This wasn't just a call. This was a life on the brink. The child's shallow breaths and frail frame screamed of hunger and neglect. The ambulance was still minutes away, and Diana's instincts kicked into high gear. She scanned the dim room, desperate for anything that could help. Formula, a clean bottle, anything. But all she found were scattered clothes and empty cans, remnants of a life unraveling. Her gaze returned to the baby. His tiny lips moved weakly, searching, pleading. The sight pierced her heart. Suddenly, a thought struck her. Mason, her youngest son, was just 6 months old. She was still breastfeeding. Diana's breath caught. Could she really do this? The idea felt both natural and unconventional. Her mind wrestled with questions. Was this crossing a line? Would it be judged harshly? But then the baby's faint cries softened further, barely audible now. His desperate need drowned out her doubts. "This is about saving a life," she whispered, to herself. Taking a deep breath, Diana shifted to a more comfortable position. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unbuttoned her uniform shirt. The baby fussed momentarily, but when he latched on, the change was immediate. His tiny body relaxed. Against hers, tension melting away as he found nourishment. Silence filled the room, a profound, almost sacred quiet. A lump rose in Diana's throat. The connection was raw, primal. She had done this countless times for Mason, but this was different. This wasn't just feeding, it was survival. Minutes passed. The baby's breathing steadied, and his frailty seemed less haunting. Still, questions gnawed at Diana's mind. Where was his family? How had he been left alone in such a state? The faint wail of sirens echoed down Elmwood Avenue, breaking the heavy stillness. Help was finally here. As the ambulance lights flickered through the cracked windows, Diana held the baby a little tighter. "You're safe now," she whispered softly. "We'll figure this out together." How could anyone leave him like this? The distant wail of the approaching ambulance pulled Diana Brooks back to the present. She adjusted her uniform quickly, shifting the baby securely in her arms. His frail body felt lighter than it should have, but there was a faint steadiness in his breathing now, a small victory. The paramedics arrived, their expressions turning grim as they assessed the situation. Diana spoke firmly, though her voice carried a trace of emotion. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately. He's severely malnourished, but he's had some milk. That should help stabilize him for now." One of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, glanced at her with a mix of admiration and understanding. "You did the right thing, officer. You might have just saved his life." Diana watched as they carefully placed the baby onto the stretcher and secured him in the ambulance. Her heart clenched as the doors closed, sealing the fragile child from view. For a moment, helplessness washed over her. What more could she do? But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. That single act of compassion had forged a bond she couldn't ignore. Returning to her patrol car, Diana's thoughts swirled with questions. Who was this baby? Did he have a family? Could they be found? And most importantly, how could she ensure he'd never face such neglect again? The answers remained elusive, but one thing was certain. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. By the time she returned to the station, the news had spread faster than she'd expected. Her colleagues greeted her with admiration. "You're a hero," one officer said, clapping her on the shoulder. Others nodded, offering words of praise, but Diana didn't feel like a hero. All she could think about was the fragile baby she'd left at the hospital. The next morning, before her shift, she stopped by the pediatric ward. Nurses greeted her warmly, updating her on the baby's condition. "He's doing better," said Nurse Carla, a seasoned caregiver with a warm smile. "We've named him Jonah for now. He's responding well to care, but he's got a long road ahead." Diana exhaled, relief flooding her chest. "Can I see him?" she asked softly. Carla nodded and led her to a small crib. Jonah lay nestled under a soft blue blanket, his tiny face more peaceful now. Diana felt a lump rise in her throat. "You're safe now, Jonah," she whispered, brushing her fingers gently across his blanket. The fight wasn't over, but seeing him this way gave her hope. Compassion had led her here, and she knew she wouldn't stop until Jonah had the life he deserved. Though Jonah's frailty was still evident, there was a quiet resilience in him that tugged at Diana Brooks's heart. She reached out, brushing her fingers gently against his tiny hand. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered softly. Days turned into a blur as word of Diana's actions rippled through Greenville. The story spread across local news. outlets, highlighting her unconventional but life-saving decision to breastfeed Jonah. At first, Diana felt uneasy about the attention. What she had done didn't seem extraordinary. It was simply what needed to be done. But then something unexpected happened. People from all over the community began showing up at the hospital with clothes, formula, diapers, and toys for Jonah. Strangers asked how they could foster or adopt children in need. The story had awakened a collective sense of compassion and responsibility. One afternoon, as Diana was leaving the hospital, a woman stopped her. She was holding a baby carrier, her eyes warm with gratitude. "I'm Loretta," the woman said, her voice trembling. "A retired teacher. I've fostered over a dozen children in my life. What you did for that baby, it reminded me why I started fostering in the first place. It's easy to get cynical, but you reminded us all that one act of love can change everything." Diana felt warmth spread through her chest. Loretta's words stayed with her as she returned to her daily patrols. Everywhere she went, people stopped to thank her and share how Jonah's story had inspired them to make a difference. But not everyone was supportive. On social media, some questioned her actions, twisting the narrative in ways that stung. Why would she breastfeed a baby that wasn't hers? One comment read, "Others used the situation to highlight divisions, bringing up race instead of celebrating unity." Diana tried to focus on the positive, but the negativity weighed on her at times. She wasn't naive. The world still carried prejudice and misunderstanding. But she also knew this. Jonah didn't care about the color of her skin or the circumstances that brought them together. All he knew was that she had been there when he needed someone the most. As the weeks passed, the community's response grew into something profound. Local churches organized fundraisers for abandoned and neglected children. Businesses donated to foster care programs. Even small gestures, a meal for a foster family or a hand-knitted blanket, added to the swell of goodwill. It was as though Jonah's story had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished. And despite the challenges, Diana felt hope rising, stronger than ever. Greenville was changing, and she knew that just like Jonah, the town was learning to fight for a better, kinder future. At the center of it all was Diana Brooks, grappling with the weight of her newfound role in this unfolding story. What had started as a routine call had turned into a life-changing journey, not just for Jonah, but for Diana and the entire community. 2 weeks after that fateful day, Diana received a message from the hospital. It was brief, but carried a gravity she wasn't prepared for. "Family has come forward for Jonah. They'd like to meet with you." Her heart wrestled with mixed emotions as she arrived at the hospital later that afternoon. Relief mingled with apprehension as she was led to a quiet meeting room. A young woman in her late 20s sat inside, her hands clasped tightly together. "I'm Annika," she said, her voice shaky. "Jonah's aunt." Diana offered a kind nod, encouraging her to continue. I didn't know he was in that situation," Annika admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "My sister Tasha, his mom, she's been struggling for years. Got caught up in things she couldn't handle. I've been trying to reach her, but..." Her voice faltered, guilt thick in the air. Diana saw the pain etched across Annika's face, the weight of family fractures and missed chances evident in her trembling words. "It's not too late to be there now," Diana said gently but firmly. "Jonah needs people who love him, people who will fight for him. That starts with you." Annika nodded, brushing away tears. "I want to take him in. I've already started the process with social services. I wanted to thank you for saving him, for giving him a chance." The meeting left Diana with conflicting emotions. She was relieved that Jonah had family who cared, but letting go of the bond she'd formed with him wasn't easy. For weeks she had visited him almost daily, watching him grow stronger, smiling at his little coos and giggles. But she knew this was what Jonah needed, a chance to be part of his own family and reclaim the connections he'd almost lost. A few days later, Diana stood with the hospital staff as Annika was formally introduced to Jonah. The little boy, now visibly healthier, looked up at his aunt with wide, curious eyes. "He's beautiful," Annika whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as her trembling fingers brushed Jonah's cheek. Diana watched from the corner of the room, her heart swelling with a bittersweet ache. She had been the bridge between Jonah's past and his future, and now it was time to let him cross. In the weeks that followed, Annika worked tirelessly to prepare for Jonah's arrival. The community that had rallied around the little boy continued to show their support, offering clothes, toys, and even setting up a nursery for Jonah in Annika's home. Jonah's story had not only changed lives, but sparked a sense of unity and compassion that bridged divides, including those of race and circumstance. And while Diana's role in his journey was drawing to a close, she knew she had made a difference that couldn't be measured by headlines, but by the life of one child who had been given a chance to thrive. Helping Annika set up a nursery had been a community effort, with countless neighbors providing everything from diapers to books and toys. But Annika wasn't the only family member who stepped forward. Tasha, Jonah's mother, had also surfaced. She was in rehab, working to rebuild her life. Though she wasn't ready to take Jonah back, she expressed a deep desire to remain part of his life. Diana agreed to meet Tasha at her request. The young woman was thin and weary, her eyes shadowed by years of hardship. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I don't deserve him," Tasha admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But I want him to know I love him. I want to do better." Diana's voice was steady yet compassionate. "It's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy. But if you're serious about being in his life, you have to start by being honest with yourself and staying on this path." Tasha nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. Moments like these reminded Diana of a simple truth. People weren't perfect, but they could change. Sometimes all it took was a spark, a single act of love to light the way. Weeks passed, and Jonah continued to thrive in Annika's care. The first time Diana visited their home after Jonah had moved in, she was struck by how love had transformed. The space, the modest two-bedroom house in Raleigh, was filled with vibrant signs of life. Brightly colored toys were scattered across the living room, family photos adorned the walls, and the soft hum of a lullaby drifted from Jonah's nursery. Annika greeted Diana at the door with a tired but genuine smile. "Come on in. Jonah's napping, but he should be up soon. He's been full of energy these days." Diana stepped inside, taking in the warmth of the home. It was clear that Annika had poured her heart into creating a safe haven for Jonah. A small crib in the corner of the nursery caught Diana's eye. Above it hung a mobile of stars and moons, gently spinning in the soft light of the room. "I wanted him to feel safe," Annika said softly, noticing Diana's gaze. "After everything he's been through." Diana's chest tightened with emotion. Jonah had gone from a fragile, neglected infant to a cherished part of a loving home. His story had sparked compassion in the community, inspired acts of kindness, and even rekindled hope in his broken family. As Diana prepared to leave, Jonah's soft giggles drifted from the nursery. He was awake, full of energy and life. Diana smiled, knowing that while her chapter in Jonah's life was ending, his story was only just beginning. A story filled with hope, resilience, and the echoes of one simple truth: love, no matter how unconventional, could change everything. As she walked back to her patrol car, Diana took a deep breath. She wasn't just leaving a home, she was leaving behind a part of herself, and that was okay, because Jonah was safe. Jonah was loved. And for Diana, that was enough. The backyard was filled with laughter and the aroma of barbecue. Colorful streamers swayed in the gentle breeze, and a large banner reading, "Happy First Birthday, Jonah," hung above the deck. Children chased each other across the lawn while adults chatted, plates piled high with food. Diana stood near the edge of the crowd, soaking it all in. The sight of Jonah toddling clumsily across the grass, his chubby hands reaching for balloons, filled her with joy. He was no longer the frail, neglected infant she had found in that dark apartment. He was strong, curious, and full of life. Annika walked over, balancing a plate and a drink. "You made it," she said with a smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Diana replied. "Look at him," Annika said, her voice soft with wonder. "He's a miracle." Diana nodded. "You gave him that miracle, Annika. You and the community." Annika shook her head. "We all did. You started it, and I'll never forget that." As they watched Jonah, Tasha approached hesitantly, a mix of joy and nervousness on her face. Over the months, she had continued her rehab journey, gradually building a relationship with her son under Annika's careful guidance. "Hi, Officer Brooks," Tasha said quietly. "Diana," she corrected gently. "Diana," Tasha repeated with a small smile. "Thank you for everything." "You've done the hard work," Diana said. "You should be proud of yourself." Tasha's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "I'm getting there, one day at a time." Nearby, Jonah giggled as a bubble floated past him, bursting on his nose. The simple joy in that moment was a testament to how far they had all come.